Gene Hackman, an Academy Award-winning legend who once commanded the silver screen, now found lifeless after 7 silent days in his isolated Santa Fe home. 7 days without visitors, phone calls, or any sign of normal life. 7 days that shattered the line between confusion, sorrow, and the insidious darkness of Alzheimer's. What truly happened within those walls, and why did no one notice until it was far too late? For decades, Gene Hackman was a force in Hollywood, his roles etched into cinematic history. He starred in iconic films that defined eras, forging characters so memorable they lingered with audiences long after the credits rolled. He was known for a quiet intensity, a measured charisma that could dominate a scene without grand gestures. Then, in the early 2000s, to the surprise of fans and colleagues, he stepped away from the limelight. No more premieres or late-night interviews, no more star-studded events. He retreated to Santa Fe, New Mexico, with his wife, Betsy Arakawa. Their home stood amid rugged desert terrain, far from curious onlookers. Locals occasionally spotted Gene at a hardware store or enjoying a coffee, but he largely kept to himself. Over time, even the most devoted admirers adjusted to his absence, assuming he was content in solitude. Yet beneath that quiet life, Alzheimer's was tightening its grip on Gene's mind, a disease that erodes memory and sense of time. It would come to define his final days. Betsy, ever supportive, tried to shield him from confusion. Still, the disease follows its own course, indifferent to love or fame. On February 11th, Betsy made a routine grocery run. She chatted briefly with the cashier, loaded her bags into the car, and drove off. That was the last time anyone outside the Hackman household saw her. In the following days, the house remained still. Gene, who might be seen strolling with his 3 dogs, did not appear. Neighbors noticed the drawn curtains and uncollected mail, but nobody intruded. In Santa Fe, privacy is a hallmark. People tend not to pry. By February 14th, the silence felt peculiar. By the 16th, it was deeply unsettling. Finally, on February 18th, a delivery person knocked on the door. No one answered. Through a window, he glimpsed a body on the floor, prompting a call to the police. Officers forced entry and discovered Gene Hackman collapsed near the entrance, his cane beside him as if he'd been trying to leave. Paramedics declared him dead at the scene. His heart had simply stopped. Inside the bedroom, Betsy's body lay beneath a neatly arranged blanket. A glass of water on the nightstand was coated with dust, her medication bottle unopened. The phone lay unused, as if no one had even considered calling for help. With Gene's advanced Alzheimer's, it was possible he never fully grasped that Betsy had passed. Perhaps he believed she was asleep, speaking to her as if she might reply. A further shock awaited in a hallway closet. Of the 3 dogs living in the house, 2 were found weak, but alive. The 3rd was discovered dead behind the closed closet door, an unsettling mystery in an already tragic scene. Did Gene, in confusion, shut it inside? Or did the dog seek refuge and become trapped? There were no answers, only heartbreak. Investigators examined the home. They found half-eaten meals on the counter, a faint smell of burnt food in the trash, and scattered dishes in the sink. All signs suggested that life had continued, until it suddenly stopped. The coroner found no evidence of foul play. Betsy appeared to have died of natural causes, though no autopsy was performed to confirm an exact reason. Gene's death, likewise, was attributed to a failing heart. Hollywood reacted with shock when word finally spread. News outlets inundated the public with tributes and retrospectives. Clips of Gene's finest moments circulated on social media, fans reminiscing about the French Connection, Hoosiers, and other classics. Many questioned how a revered actor could slip away unnoticed for days. Yet others pointed out that Gene had chosen an isolated existence, one that, in the end, may have cut him off from the very connections that could have helped. Local authorities mapped a rough timeline. Betsy likely died soon after her grocery trip, leaving Gene alone in the house with his Alzheimer's and 3 dogs. His confusion deepened. Perhaps he tried to feed himself, to feed the dogs, but the threads of routine unraveled. Neighbors had seen no lights at night, no signs of movement, but they assumed the couple was traveling or preferred solitude. Each passing day tightened the silence, until it became suffocating. There's a phenomenon in Alzheimer's known as time shift, where patients revert to earlier periods in their lives, forgetting recent events. Gene might have wandered from room to room, calling Betsy's name, setting a place for her at the table, believing she would respond. In that fog of memory, he might have found small comforts, perhaps not realizing she was gone. Or maybe, in fleeting lucid moments, he did understand, and the pain was more than he could bear. The house itself told a story of interrupted tasks, a coffee mug still half full, a newspaper folded open to a crossword puzzle, groceries left in a bag on the kitchen floor. Officers surmised that Gene's disorientation grew each day until he no longer knew how to seek help. The dogs, once his constant companions, were as trapped as he was in that quiet decay. One neighbor would later recall hearing faint barking on a night when the moon was high. She dismissed it as the usual sounds of the desert, coyotes or distant animals, but looking back, she wondered if it had been a desperate call from Gene's dogs. In a community prizing self-reliance, nobody wants to overstep. In this case, that reluctance proved devastating. When paramedics carried Gene's body from the house, they noted his cane. It lay inches from his outstretched hand, as if he'd been grasping for it in a last act of resolve. Was he trying to open the door, to step outside and call for assistance? Did he collapse the moment he realized Betsy was gone? Or was his final fall simply the culmination of failing heart, unconnected to any grand epiphany? In the days following, a surge of media attention descended upon Santa Fe. Reporters hoping to glean more information found neighbors guarded. They mourned Gene Hackman in their own subdued way, recalling chance encounters and quiet nods at the post office. No one had expected such a dark turn of events. No one believed a Hollywood icon would end his days so utterly alone. Amid the speculation, veterinarians assessed the surviving dogs. Malnourished but salvageable, they were placed with local rescue volunteers. Some said the dogs paced anxiously, as if searching for a presence that was no longer there. The haunting question of how the third dog ended up locked in a closet lingered, a silent testament to the chaos born of illness and isolation. Without words, the animals carried the weight of that week's horrors. The film community paid heartfelt tribute to Gene's legacy, celebrating his countless accolades. Social media brimmed with clips of his most stirring performances. Directors extolled his diligence on set, praising the authenticity he brought to every role. Co-stars described him as both formidable and generous. Yet these glowing memorials contrasted harshly with the bleakness of his final days. The sorrow lay not in his passing, but in the manner and isolation of it. A pastor from a nearby church spoke at a small memorial service, reminding attendees that fame can be fleeting and that none of us are immune to loneliness or illness. He urged the community to reflect on how many around them might be suffering out of sight. Privately, some neighbors wrestled with guilt, questioning whether a knock on the door or a phone call could have changed the outcome. Hindsight offered only painful conjecture. Stories like Gene Hackman's force us to confront uncomfortable truths about how easily someone can fade from our awareness, even someone once adored by millions. We assume the famous must have networks of support, staff, or friends always at hand, yet reality can be startlingly different. Sometimes, by choice or circumstance, they slip through the cracks, and the world remains oblivious until an emergency bursts into the open. In the wake of Gene's death, a few local Santa Fe residents began checking on older neighbors more frequently. A simple hello, a friendly question about groceries, small gestures that can bridge the gap between isolation and help. The memory of those 7 days served as a sobering reminder that even the most celebrated among us can fall victim to silence when memory fails and hearts grow frail. Meanwhile, Hollywood moved on as it always does. New releases, new stars, fresh scandals, and triumphs. Gene's name joined the pantheon of legends who lived out their final acts beyond the public gaze. For a moment, the world was united in reflecting on his remarkable career and the tragedy that closed it. Then, inevitably, attention shifted elsewhere, as they tend to in an industry built on perpetual reinvention. Still, the questions remain. Did Gene die never realizing Betsy was gone, lost in a haze of fragmented recollections? Or did he find a moment of clarity, only to be overwhelmed by the sorrow of it all? Was the dog in the closet a tragic accident, or the result of a final confusion that Gene couldn't escape? Answers are buried in the silence of a mind undone by disease, in a house that will never speak its secrets. 7 days. In that short span, lives ended. A family of dogs was fractured, and a harrowing mystery was born. Only the chance arrival of a delivery person prevented an even longer delay. How much more time would have passed before anyone noticed? Could rescue have come sooner? These questions gnaw at the conscience, pointing to a shared responsibility to remain vigilant. And so, Gene Hackman's last chapter stands in stark contrast to the cinematic grandeur of his career. His work on film remains a monument to artistry and dedication, but his final days reflect a human fragility that fame could not shield. We honor his legacy by remembering both his luminous achievements and the cautionary tale of his solitary end. At length, the house in Santa Fe was emptied. Personal effects were gathered, the surviving dogs placed in caring homes, and the property left to echo with memories no one could fully untangle. Neighbors eventually stopped recounting the dreadful discovery, preferring to recall Jean's polite nods or Betsy's gentle wave. Yet no one truly forgot those 7 silent days, days that might have been altered by a single knock or a simple act of curiosity. Even now, fans revisit Jean's films with renewed poignancy, seeing in each performance the depth he brought to his craft. They celebrate his fierce intelligence, his ability to vanish into a role, and the raw emotional core he delivered on screen. But beneath the applause lies a tender truth, that behind every legendary figure stands a vulnerable person, subject to the same heartbreaks and trials as anyone else. And so we remain haunted by a final question. If Gene Hackman had managed one more step with his cane, if he'd opened the door and ventured outside, would anyone have come to his aid in time? Or was fate sealed by the insidious progression of Alzheimer's, the reluctance of neighbors to interfere, and the quiet acceptance of a man who had long since turned his back on the public eye? Memory itself is fragile, and where Alzheimer's reigns, definitive answers rarely survive. The only certainty is that 2 lives and 1 beloved dog were lost in a slow, unobserved tragedy, discovered only by chance. In this story lies an uncomfortable reminder. No one, not even an icon, is truly safe from the shadows that gather when isolation and illness conspire. Ultimately, Gene Hackman's legacy endures in the art he left behind. Through a tapestry of unforgettable roles, he spoke volumes to audiences worldwide. Yet the stark silence of those last 7 days remains a testament to how a life, no matter how celebrated, can vanish unseen. We owe it to ourselves and to the memory of those who slipped through the cracks, to reach out, to offer a hand, and to recognize that even legends need the light of human connection. One thing is certain: fame does not hold back the inevitabilities of age, disease, or mortality. When the world finally learned of Gene Hackman's passing, the moment for intervention had long since passed. That truth lingers in every retelling of his final week, casting a shadow over his brilliant filmography and the heartfelt tributes that followed. There, in that shadow, stands our collective reckoning. If someone of Gene Hackman's stature could fade so quietly, who else have we lost sight of? Whose desperate silence remains unheard? And can we, in remembering his story, learn to break down one another's barriers of solitude before it's too late? Ultimately,